prototyping. So at this point, when I do a create, I can have it call a success function after I complete it. So it's going to save it up to StackMob. Any questions about how we just persisted that data?
What was that last thing about the success?
Oh, yeah. So inside of that create function, we have the option of having a success or an error function get called. I didn't include the error function, but you could. This is all happening asynchronously, so whenever the server returns a result, it'll then call that success function. And at that point, we're going to want to add it to our collection. And that's what happened. That's what we're going to do in the next step. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to open up my collection file here. I'm going to paste in my own StackMob init for Citizen.js. And the first bit of code is the same. We've got our model. Here are collections. You'll notice I dropped off that URL. I don't need the URL argument because StackMob is taking care of that RESTful endpoint for me. So Backbone's not going to complain. But if you're writing your own Node.js backend or Ruby or PHP or Java or whatever language you like, if you're a server-side person, you already have your own RESTful API, then you would use the URL parameter inside of your collection to save your data. And here for my wines, I have the concept of fetching all of my wines. So this is basically going to StackMob, using the collections and saying pull down all of them. And I have a choice of doing it asynchronously, and I can say true or false. So here I'm saying, let's do it synchronously. Let's not do it asynchronously. I'm going to create my first wine, and then on success, I'm going to add my new model to my wines collection, and then output it. So let's go over here. I'm going to drop my collection in there. And so it persisted, and I've got my two objects here. I've got Chardonnay, so I've got two that are being listed here. If I go back to my dashboard and I refresh, I've created a new wine, I persisted it, and I fetched it back here. So the reason why we need to fetch it first is because we want to have all of our wines available. If I just created a new instance of wines and then added a wine to it, I'd only have that one wine in my collection. So when I start my app up, I want to say, go get me all the wines off the server, and now I'm going to create a new one and add it onto my collection. So it's always important to think about your collections as in, when my app loads, do I need to go and get some initial data to populate my collection? Because I only want to create one collection at the beginning of my app and pass that collection around to my different views. And you're going to see that in our next section. Think of a collection as like a singleton, right? We only want one instance of our data, and that to be the sort of the one source of truth for us in our data is that one collection. And so we pass it around. We don't want to keep recreating that collection because that will get us out of sync, but it also will sort of make it more difficult to keep track of where's my data. If we only have one instance of it, we can keep track of it better. So if I run this code again and execute it again, now I have 3 objects because I created a third one. If I run it again, now I have 4 objects. So each time it's adding that newly created model into my collection, and then I'm outputting to the console the current state of my collection. Yep.
Is this code dependent upon the code before, like the StackMob-model.html, or is this completely separate?
It's totally separate.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I copied and pasted my init method into the new collection one. Otherwise, you're going to be hitting my app, which is fine. It doesn't matter if you want to hit my app, but you will be seeing different numbers of wines showing up because you're hitting mine, and I don't know how many I have up there right now. 29. 29 now. Okay, well, people have been playing around with the code maybe, which is totally cool. But Yeah, I wanted you to sort of experience what it's like to create your own schemas using StackMob and just playing with your own data. But you're welcome to play around with mine.
So you're getting the model from the database this time, other than the other way around, whereas before you're creating the model in JavaScript.
I'm still creating the model locally, but I'm getting the data to populate my collection from the server. Yeah. So instead of starting out with a blank, empty collection and adding wines to it, I'm saying get me all the existing ones because I want to add a new one to it. We all good at this point? Yeah.
Let's say you have a lot. Let's say you have like thousands of wines.
Sure.
So can you break down your collections like pagination?
Yeah, absolutely. We have the concept of a query, and in that query you can set ranges, and you can actually say start at 0 and give me the next 100 wines, and then you can say start at 101 and give me the next 100, and you can actually create your own pagination using ranges and things like that, queries.
So if you wanted to add one, do you have to pull down all 1,000 and then add one, or do you just?
No, you could just add one at that point if you wanted to.
Like you said, 900 to 1,000.
Yeah.
I wanted those, and then you just add from that.
Yeah, actually, yeah. That's a good question for clarification. So this line of code right here is optional, right? You could say at any point create a new bottle of wine using my model, right? Because I'm just creating a new instance of my model right here, and I'm calling the create method. If I don't want to have that locally, or if I'm doing this pagination and this wine's being added on to the end of like 5,000 wines, I could just drop this whole success block here if I wanted to, or just drop this line of code here where I'm adding it to my local model. And I can just create the wine, and then I can continue. Maybe at that point I then do another query, and I say, get me the next 100 wines, or get me the most recent 100 wines, for example. And you can do that query again. So you can repopulate your collection at any time, but it's the same collection that you initialized at the beginning of your app. Does that make sense? So right here, I'm saying wines equals new wines.
Right.
I only want to call that once.
Right.
And then this wines right here, I want to pass around. I want to use it here. I want to use it down here. If I want to use it somewhere else in my app, I want to make sure I pass it to that view in my app so it's available to me.
Is the fetch getting all 5,000?
This fetch is getting all 5,000. If I did a StackMob query, I could then just fetch a specific one.
So if you fetch the specific one,
Yeah.
you hit the add.
Yeah.
Is it adding it to the end of the specific fetch, or is it adding it to the end of the whole collection?
It's added to the end of that specific fetch because this is all local.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then it will save back in that location.
exactly.
So let's say you had 500, you had 500, you put add, it would be 501. And
Exactly.
add it to the middle.
Exactly. Yeah, and then you can sort your fetches as well. Like you could say sort them by type of wine, or sort it by the winery name alphabetically, for example. So you might be doing additional fetches and sorting that way.
Okay.
So here we talked about this. Now, asynchronous true, asynchronous false. So usually we want to do things asynchronously. So normally we would say asynchronous true, but I wanted to make sure that it was my wine collection was populated here. If I change this to true right here, let's see what happens to our results down here. Oh, so that worked. So if there's any latency in getting the data back, and I hit this block of code right here where I'm outputting my wines collection, and I haven't gotten a response back, I could just show just one wine, that most recent one that was created. So it's important to think about, making sure. Yeah, I think asynchronous is usually the way to go, but make sure that you are fetching it ahead of time asynchronously, and that your wine collection's populated before you start adding additional ones to it. Otherwise, you might end up with just one item in your collection. You're like, why did my code execute that way? Probably won't run into that, but I just pointed out. So there's that. Okay, yeah, so basically if I tried to execute this code, and I did asynchronous true, it may,